Anyways, it's delightful to be here, and Tim asked me to talk a little bit about partnerships in the transition. Senator Steinberg has named me chair of labor, so I think it's appropriate for me to talk about the prospects for transitioning with our friends in labor, particularly organized labor. When I was on the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors in the Air District, Contra Costa has the highest concentration of hazardous materials sites by geography and by population in the state. We have 4 refineries, 4 of the 5 refineries in the Bay Area, 4 of the 13 left in the country, so we had a lot of interaction with them, and chemical companies. And I say that because for 2 reasons. I'll come back to sort of them as an industry and as Fortune 500 and 100 companies and how we can partner with them. But to begin with the partnership that we did in the Bay Area, and in that kind of particular with environmental groups and with labor, and we were able to do quite a bit that actually helped those regulated communities to provide for a higher level of safety for their employees and for the community that surrounded them, but also to make sure that the environment was protected. We were able to pass a historic refinery flare rule at the Bay Area Quality Management District, largely working with the regulated community. But politically, to be perfectly honest, it was not going to be easy for someone like myself, a local elected official, or in this instance, a member of the legislature, to take on Fortune 100 companies whose culture, and many wonderful people in those industries, the refining and chemical industry, but overall, as many of us know, the culture is very different. And to get them to change is no easy thing. So to have that partnership with labor for 2 reasons, well, for multiple reasons. One, to be perfectly honest, the political power they were able to bring. Now, historically, that has been a difficult thing between the environmental movement and labor. Having spent lots of hours with environmentalists, and I consider myself an environmentalist, and with labor folks and organized labor, particularly in the iron workers and building construction trades, those cultures are different. How their members, their leaders get elected and rise to power is very different than in the environmental movement in many instances. The pressure is, and particularly in an economy like this, is to get their members off the bench and to work. And that requires compromise and negotiations, and sometimes, obviously, the number one priority, as I stated, is to get those people to work. So we need to partner with them. And I have found in my experience that most of the differences we have had between the environmental movement and organized labor, in my view, is largely cultural. Very different backgrounds, we can go into stereotypes, but we have to change that. I think those of us who consider ourselves, and everybody in this room does, part of the environmental movement, we have to be empathetic with business managers and agents who are very interested in getting their members who have different demographic, different academic standards, getting them to work. And when you do that, you get a gestalt that is really quite powerful. And in my experience, can overcome Fortune 100 companies in a relatively small county. So I think that's where a wonderful opportunity is, and part of that is working with the academic institutions to do more career tech, to understand that being a skilled electrician or welder in an institution that is very old, and getting them to continue to have those jobs and develop a transition plan for those industries and those members and employees to something that's going to be very different. So I think that partnership is really crucial. And it's a relationship that I'm looking forward to trying to further and really, again, institutionalize as we transfer to something very different. And then let me just say about the regulated industry. Those industries, the traditional industries, are culturally conservative. I like to say everybody wants change. Of course, that's part of the vocabulary of today. But it's sort of like that old expression, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Everybody's enthusiastic about change, but when it actually comes to implementing change, that's something different. And in these kind of very conservative industries, the ability to change and to make sure that it's not just greenwashing, that they really are going to change, but we're going to be open to a transition for them where there's profit, and there's a transition to this new economy. And let me just conclude with an observation. I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, as any of you know, history of the Industrial Revolution. When I go back to Lowell to see relatives, you still have physically the reminders of what happened in the beginning of the last century that transformed the world, really, and transformed it in many ways for the better. Located on the Merrimack River. When I grew up, we used to say roll up the windows when we went over the river. The river is much cleaner now, thanks in large part to the Clean Water Act. It didn't come about because the regulated industries wanted to change, not that they wanted to change, but they were not able. But when you think from a historical context of transformative periods of history, and I really believe we are in a transformative period of history, how much was demanded of the pioneers in that transformation, but also how long it took and the tenacity involved in being part of the transformative period, particularly pioneers. And we are all pioneers, for better or worse. So when you look back at the Industrial Revolution, you realize what a hold it still has in our economy, and the challenge to transform all of that infrastructure is going to be a huge endeavor, and it's going to require a great deal of tenacity. So I would ask you to be tenacious, be persistent, obviously, stay at us, and I mean that literally, continue to goad us in the legislature and electeds to continue to be not afraid to challenge and not afraid to change. And I would also ask you to be really open-minded about the partnerships we need, because this transformation is going to be a huge challenge. So thanks for letting me be here today, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.